Hello, everybody. This is CJ Wiley back with more adventures on the road. Yesterday, I told a story about being in Detroit and how I lost all my money and then ended up going down to a bar and playing a guy with a stick and beating him out of $1,000 and then going back to the Rack. The Rack was a private club there in Detroit. It was on 9 Mile Road, I believe, where you had to hit a buzzer to get in and then another buzzer to get in, and they were protecting the place because there was literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in there at any given time and millions of dollars that passed hands. So I was in a good spot, and I'd lost all my money the first day to a guy named Johnny Ross from Jacksonville, Florida. He was kind of a notorious pool hustler and really sharp guy, great gift to gab. Played cards at a high level, pool at a high level, and just was really gifted at getting people to play and go off for the maximum amount of money. Anyway, when I went back to the Rack, I started practicing because at the Rack, you were allowed to practice for free. They didn't charge you for any pool time. However, if you gambled with any of the key guys there, you had to give up a percentage of your winnings. And there were some 5% guys and some 10% guys. That means you'd have to either give up 5% or 10%, depending on who the player was. And really, it's gauged on how much they would lose. The big high rollers were 10% men. So anyway, Johnny Ross came up to me when I was practicing and motioned me over, and he was like, "Hey, kid," he says, "we got a game for you that you can play against this guy named Cletus." Now, when he said "we," I knew already anytime there was any big gambling pool rooms, this is something a lot of people don't know, but there's always what they called a corporation of players, gamblers that are actually in together, but nobody really knows. Some people know. I've been around enough that I could tell that it was always going to be there, and it would take me a few days to figure out who really was in together. And it's such a big advantage when you have hustlers in together because they can double steer other people into their partners, and they don't know. They give up false lines. There's just a whole lot of somewhat treacherous ways that they can win money. And you just can't do that if you're in there by yourself. I always traveled with at least one other person and a lot of times two other hustlers. We could do somewhat similar things, but not near as well as the ones that had a pool room staked out. And Detroit had so much action that there was actually a corporation with 7 different players. And I knew who a few of them were, but it took me, again, a few days to figure out who they all were. But I did eventually. I knew Johnny Ross was part of it. So when he said "we," I knew what he was talking about. And when he told me that I could get 30%, I knew that the other 7 partners all got 10% apiece. So, again, I knew that from being around some of the sharpest hustlers in the past. And that's just how the game is played. You know, regular people will never know that this is happening. So anyway, Johnny said, we're going to put up all the money, give you 30%. I resisted that a little bit, but I knew that was the deal. And he said, but there's a catch. He said, you're going to play this Cletus, and he won't play you unless you insult him. I mean, you got to talk dirty to him. And for the purposes of this video, since I know some younger pool players might hear it one of these days, I'm going to keep the profanity down so you can just put it together what was said. But Johnny said, you have to insult this guy, call him a dirty, rotten, no good, blah, blah, blah. And when he said that, I was like, are you kidding me? That's just strange. About that time, I heard the buzzer at the door and the next buzzer, and in walks this huge guy. He must have been 6'4", I guess, 6'5", but he looked like Brutus out of the Popeye and Brutus cartoons. He had like a 3-day beard that he probably grew in about 3 hours, and He was a menacing looking character, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh my God, I gotta talk nasty to this guy." So Johnny kind of gave me the sign, and I motioned and was motioned over there. Johnny went up to him and, "Hey, you big ugly piece of crap! I didn't know they let your kind in the front door. I figured you had to go in the back door with the rest of the garbage." So anyway, that's how it started. Johnny ends up motioning over to me and said, "We got a kid over here that wants to play you some. If you're scared but can tolerate a kid beating you." He just immediately looks over at me and he goes, "Oh my God." He says, "You look like the kid brother of a 16-year-old girl I went for 3 years with just to date him." Let me say. So anyway, I followed suit and cussed him out a little bit, or a lot of bit, and told him just everything I could think of. Again, I don't want to get into that part of the story, but it is important to know what kind of character this Cletus was, because he was a real doozy. So we started playing. I played him one pocket, and this guy, as a matter of fact, they would put 3 balls out on the pool table and bet him he couldn't run them in any order. So this guy couldn't play pool at all. I gave him 9-4. I had to make 9 balls in one corner pocket. He had to make 4 balls in the other. And his scratches didn't count. That means he could foul at any time and he wasn't punished, which usually you lose a ball when you do that. So any of you out there that's played one pocket know what I'm talking about. So we ended up playing for, it was probably 5 hours. And when the smoke cleared, I beat him out of 18,000. So anyway, he pays off all the money and ends up saying a few other nasty things before he left and walked out the door. So Johnny and I went back, and the time, by the way, was $1,800. So I'd been playing free. Of course, the corporation had 70% of that, but still, that's the most I ever paid for time, $1,800. So Johnny and I are cutting up the money. He's giving me my end, and I said, "Man, Johnny, that guy is just off the charts weird." And Johnny goes, "Yeah." He says, "You can't imagine what he's going to be doing now." I said, "What is that?" He said, "He's going to go get a limo. He's going to hire like 3 hookers. He's going to have them tie him up. One of them will put a loaded gun to his head, and the other 2 will whip him with wet washcloths. And they'll drive him around Detroit like he's been kidnapped." That's what he likes to do. I was like, oh my God. Anyway, by the time the smoke cleared that day, I think I had about $7,000. So I went from being completely broke to having $7,000. And my adventure continued, because it sure didn't stop there at the Rack in Detroit. If you like this story and want to hear all my secrets of how I became the #1 player in the world at one time, my systems, fundamentals, techniques, join me at masteringpocketbilliards.com. And I want to share everything with you to enable you to reach your highest potential like I did, because you don't have the luxury of having some of these adventures. This type of life really doesn't exist anymore, the road player life. And anyway, stay tuned for more stories, and I'll see you then.